Good evening, Brian, and welcome along to the Lodge Hope of Cratchie number 337 and the 90th meeting of our lockdown lecture series. As ever, it's a great pleasure and privilege for me to welcome you all along here this evening. Particularly so after we had our first face-to-face meeting for our office bearers last Friday, and it was a great joy to see some of the Brian in that sort of face-to-face environment where we were able to just actually see each other and have a bit of banter without the digital technology. It was really good for us to get together. We were able to, importantly for me, Brian, I've loved my term as Right Worshipful Master of the Lodge Hope of Cratchie, but it was due to finish about 2 years ago. Just before we went into lockdown, I was due to come out of the chair in April so I could go to the chair of my own mother lodge for our centenary. But we do now have a new master-elect, Brother Kevin Thompson, who many of you will know. He's a great ritualist, and he's got quite a few lectures up his sleeve as well, which no doubt we'll see them in the coming months. And we were also able to approve our accounts for the last 2 years, which will keep Provincial Grand Lodge and the Grand Lodge of Scotland happy with us. So it was really good to get everybody back. Very quick meeting, Brian, but it was really good. So for those who were there, it was brilliant to see you. And for everyone else, it's an open invite when we come back for our installation in February, Brian. However, back to tonight, can I remind you all of the guidelines from the Grand Lodge of Scotland in terms of Zoom meetings? Please, if your bandwidth permits, keep your video running, keep a name in the screen that I recognise, and please can you sign our virtual tile on our Facebook pages, Brian? Thank you so much. Well, Brian, meeting number 90, who'd have thought? And it's a great pleasure to bring another brother from overseas, albeit he's an Englishman, to come and speak to us, and that's Brother David, Worshipful Brother David Barrett, who's going to speak to us about the Morgan affair. Quite a story in American Freemasonry, but I'll leave David to talk to us about that. He's a past master of the Anana Lodge, number 70, in the Grand Lodge of Israel. He's currently the Grand Librarian. He's been a Grand Superintendent for the lodges over there, past First Principal of the chapter, and past First Principal of a new chapter that they opened, Jerusalem chapter. He holds a 32nd degree in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. He's thrice illustrious master, but probably what tops all of those, he's a 10 times grandfather, which is probably more than any of the bubbles and trinkets that we can give ourselves, Brian. He's a dental surgeon, and he moved to Israel in 1981 to set up his dental practice, and he's still been there ever since, albeit he's recently been back in the UK to see some of his grandchildren in Manchester, I believe. So without any further ado, Worshipful Brother David Barrett, it's a pleasure to welcome you along this evening to the Lodge Hope of Cratchie and our lockdown lecture series, and for you to be our second brother from the beautiful country of Israel. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank your dear brother Gordon for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to deliver this lecture, which forms a very important part of the Masonic history of America. Secondly, I welcome all my brethren who are watching in. And whilst I know I can never meet you all in your actual lodge, this export of Masonic knowledge or enlightenment, wherever and whenever, is of the greatest importance in strengthening our aims and ideals. And I must say, Zoom has been a wonderful way to meet and part. So let's talk about this tragic episode in the life of American Masonry. Most of us here tonight are familiar with the term 9/11, when the Islamic terrorists took down the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York in 2001. But did you know that there was another 9/11 which occurred in 1826, which in a very short period of time almost decimated Freemasonry in the then United States of America? This actual event, which took place in 1826 on American soil, created immediate repercussions that essentially encompass the following 19 years up to 1845, and as we shall see, eventually led to the recognition, funnily enough, of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in our time. All will become clear later. It affected the New England states, Massachusetts, and last but not least in Albany, the capital of New York State, where it all began. What happened was an incident which ignited the then discontent in the States, where a notable section of the public disliked the Masonic influence in government. It altered the course of American politics, government, and history. It is referred today as the Morgan Affair, but the Masons of 1829 called it the Morgan Excitement. To appreciate events, one has to understand that Masonry in America prior to this period was flourishing. There were public processions and ceremonies, and the fraternity attracted men from far and wide. These were the glory days, the heydays of Freemasonry. How did it start? In 1826, a resident of New York, known as William Morgan, was apparently abducted, he disappeared, and presumed murdered by Freemasons. This event, especially because of the claim of murder, strengthened the anti-Masonry movement to the effect that an anti-Masonry political party was formed, which was so powerful that it eventually succeeded in electing 2 state governors. It will be apposite at this point to note that the anti-Masonic political party was the first in the United States of America to announce a platform and a nominating convention. In 1832, they even had a party candidate for presidency, a former Mason, but much more on this later. I'm just going to show a picture of William Morgan. Share screen, share. This is the known picture of William Morgan. It's a fairly good representation from all the pictures I've seen, that they're all the same. This is William Morgan. I'm going to stop the share. Okay. He was known as Captain William Morgan from the War of 1812, where the United States was fighting the United Kingdom in those days, was said to have been born in August 1774 in Culpeper County, Virginia. He was probably a Mason, but at the time there was no record of his membership in any Blue Lodge. He claimed to have been initiated abroad and indeed gained admittance, presumably on proof, to Lodge 282 at Batavia, New York, as a visitor. Batavia Lodge 433, chartered by the Grand Lodge of New York, was a new lodge chartered only 13 months prior to his abduction. But in retrospect, 60 years ago or so, there was found in the annals of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Nova Scotia the records of the Eastern Star Lodge number 37, recording an initiation in 1815 of a William Morgan, described as a branch pilot, meaning a district or local area pilot, who had been initiated in October 1815, passed on the same date, which was not an unusual occurrence in those days, and raised in November 1815. He also claimed that he was an ex-soldier, having served under General Jackson at New Orleans, had risen to the rank of captain. This opinion conflicts with that expressed by J. Ross Robertson, who was past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Canada, who says that Morgan's name has never been found on any army roll. But similarly, this claim apparently was verified by the records of the War of 1812 to 1815 in the public archives at Ottawa. The claim that he fought at the Battle of New Orleans is not supported by records of any kind, including the records of United States War Departments. Thus, if he served, he was not on the side of the United States of America. Take note. He was subsequently described by several persons as envious, malicious, vindictive, a heavy drinker, neglectful of family. He was also in continuous debt to several persons, one of which apparently contributed to what eventually transpired. People who knew him claimed that he was British, not American. Some family history. In 1819, having worked as a bricklayer, he married a 16-year-old Lucy Pendleton of Richmond, Virginia, the daughter of a Reverend Joseph Pendleton, a Methodist minister. No record of their marriage has been found, and the question still remains as to Morgan's age and place of birth. In 1821, he moved to York, Canada, and became a brewer. After a fire destroyed the distillery and being reduced to poverty, he moved to Rochester, New York, and thence to Batavia in 1823. He did not attend any lodges in these places. He had a common English education and was a pleasant individual by all accounts, except when intemperate, which he was to a great degree. Must have some Scottish blood in him somewhere, I don't know. Now, it is well documented that in 1825, he was received into the York Rite Royal Arch degree at Leroy in New York, in the Western Star chapter number 33 in May 1825. When subsequently a chapter was opened in Batavia, and despite his name being on the petition, the other petitioners rejected him because of his habit of drinking and talking about Freemasonry in the village tap room. The chapter duly established, he then applied for affiliation and was blackballed in consequence of his intemperate and unworthy habits. This rejection led Brother Morgan to proceed to repudiate the order in the following manner. As in other places, Batavia had a local newspaper, the Republican Advocate, the People's Press, edited then by a Colonel David K. Miller, who was a friend of Morgan and apparently of similar disposition to him, but not a practicing Mason. Some say that he had been initiated, but had also been prevented from further advancement, and he too was in awkward financial straits. On the 5th of August, Morgan, together with John Davids, approached Miller with the sole purpose to publish a malicious book on Freemasonry, a fraternal society that had become influential in the United States to expose its secrets and to be entitled An Exposition of Ancient Craft Masonry, with the hope, no doubt, to make a fortune from such disclosures for both of them. Miller published the following in his newspaper: "There will be issued from the press in this place, in a short time, a work of rare interest to the uninitiated, being an exposition of ancient craft masonry by one who has been a member of the institution for years." I'll just show you a copy of the actual book. And here you see a picture. This is a copy of the book that it did come out. After the events to be related below, it was eventually titled Illustrations of Freemason by one of the fraternity, and actually became a bestseller. The pamphlet consisted of 125 pages at $1 per copy. Indeed, as demand outstripped supply, other publishers joined the fray, the sole purpose to destroy Freemasonry and to cash in, although it is also rumored that Freemasons were buying it to stop it being spread. A side note, the first rituals of the Grand Lodge of England were published in the London Times by a reporter shortly after the forming of the Grand Lodge of England, just over 100 years earlier. The then state governor and Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of New York was known as DeWitt Clinton, and actually issued a Masonic edict requesting Masons to ignore Morgan's exposures, but to no avail. It was initially reported that Freemason members decided to try and persuade Morgan to abandon the idea of the book. When that didn't work, advice was given to him in the hopes that he would change his mind. That didn't work either, which then supposedly resulted in a dishonorable plan by the local Freemasons. First, someone set fire to the newspaper building in September 1826, not causing serious damage. As a result of this stupidity, 4 Freemasons were arrested, 3 indicted and jailed. Their actions were not ordered or condoned in any way by any lodge, and indeed a number of Masons joined in a printed notice offering a reward of $100 for the apprehension of the arsonists. It is safe to say that if this whole instance of an attempt to prevent the printing of a booklet of a type that had already been published elsewhere had been ignored, then there would be no sequel. Morgan and Miller would have sunk into obscurity, and I wouldn't be able to entertain you today with a lecture. On the 9th of August, 1826, a notice appeared in a local newspaper denouncing Morgan as a swindler and a dangerous man. And 2 months later, in September, he was arrested by a legal Masonic posse and tried for theft, accused by a Mason known as Ebenezer Kingsley for stealing wearing apparel but discharged. The nature of the charge was that he had borrowed a shirt and a cravat, which he had not seen fit to return. He was immediately rearrested for the non-payment of a debt relating to a tavern bill that he had contracted with Aaron Ackley by a member of one of the posse, a taverner, Nicholas Cheesebury, for a debt of $2 and found guilty, being fined $2.69 and locked up in the same evening in the Ontario County Jail, which is in Canandaigua, about 50 miles east of Batavia, where he remained until the next evening. On the 12th of September in 1826, he was released, the debt having been settled by somebody called Lawson, and he was never seen again in the vicinity. Apparently, the members of the posse conspired together, and immediately on his discharge, he was seized, forcibly thrust into a carriage. I'm just going to post a picture that appeared on a local newspaper. Just where we go, we'll see shit. Where's my, where's it gone? Oh, there we are. Okay. Seized, thrust into a carriage. Here you have depicted, witnessed by the jailer's wife and Mrs. Hall, as reported by the Middlebury Free Press. This is the picture they posted, and taken via Fort Niagara to Canada, where his presence was noted on the 14th of September. After that, there is no recorded information about him. Okay, I want to, okay.
David, the picture's not come up?
No, it didn't come up, sorry. Oh, wait a minute, that came up. So take that down. Just, is it here? Sorry. There we are, sorry, there we are, sorry. There we are. This was in the Middlebury Free Press. Okay, it's been forced into this carriage and driven off. Okay, stop share. Thank you. It transpired as a subsequent anti-Masonic inquiry, known as the Lewiston Convention, that several Masons and the sheriff at the jail had colluded to abduct Morgan and transport him safely across to Canada with a promise that he would not return. He was to have found a place to live and send for his family. Instead, he disappeared. His disappearance was noted, and subsequent to an investigation, 4 Masons were arrested, tried and convicted, and sentenced to jail terms ranging from 1 month to 3 years for kidnapping, but not for murder, as no body was ever found. The lenient punishment caused public outrage, and as there was no conclusive evidence as to what happened to William Morgan, on the 15th of April 1825, a legislative act was passed to allow the New York governor to institute inquiries by establishing a special council to investigate Morgan's abduction. A special prosecutor was also appointed to bring the perpetrators to justice, and in 1830, a report by the special counsel was provided that outlined their findings. Apparently, they were afraid that Morgan was going to continue with his Masonic expose. They came, so they said, to a financial agreement with Morgan, and that Morgan consented to be abducted in exchange for $500. It was the sheriff at his trial who confirmed that Morgan was going willingly, and he actually accompanied them to Fort Niagara. Also, writs were issued against those who drove him to the border and those who held him in Fort Niagara, all apparently Freemasons. Indeed, it seems that the whole Batavia Lodge was indicted, but nothing being proven against the majority, these were squashed. The Grand Royal Arch chapter, which comprised 110 chapters in those days, disclaimed all knowledge and approbation of the affair, in which they were followed by most of the lodges in the state. The trial of the abduction made headline news, especially for Miller's newspaper. Miller published his book detailing the secrets of Freemasonry, which had become a bestseller because of all the hype surrounding the missing Morgan. Miller also maintained that Morgan had been, inverted commas, carried away, which of course increased speculations where Morgan might be or exactly what happened to him. And it wasn't long before rumors started that the Masons had murdered him by drowning him at the falls. Morgan's disappearance caused New York Governor DeWitt Clinton, a Mason, to offer a $1,000 reward for information about Morgan's whereabouts and this reward was never claimed. There were supposed confessions, but no, not one was identical, nor matched the known circumstances. However, I will make one note of apparent death, a deathbed confession by Henry Valence, who's a Mason, to a Dr. John Emery, that being Morgan, inverted commas, Morgan met a watery grave when he was dumped into the rapids of the Niagara River and swept over the falls. Close quote. However, there were no other witnesses, no verification possible, and no body found. Subsequent to another body being found, it was then claimed that this was Morgan, but this was probably faked to support the erection of a monument sacred to the memory of William Morgan by the National Christian Association, who opposed secret societies. This is still standing in Batavia and is known as the Marble Lie. I'm just going to post a picture of this. Here we have this. This is still standing. That's supposed to be Morgan at the top. And here you have this picture. If you go today, you'll see this monument. However, with deliberate encouragement from the anti-Masonry movement and by word of mouth, Morgan's demise became a fact, more so when, on the 17th of October 1827, a body was found on the shore of Lake Ontario, Oak Orchard Harbour, some 30 miles from the Niagara River. Immediately, all the newspapers claimed it was Morgan. There was an inquest and accidental death being recorded by the coroner. The body was buried, name unknown, but a week later, after the facts of the inquest being published, the body was disinterred and another inquest arranged, at which a new person appeared named Thurlow Weed, a newspaperman with the Albany Register, looking for publicity. And of this will be more later. This inquest and jury of 23 souls concluded, after denying the primary witnesses and the fact that the description of the facial features had been somewhat altered, that indeed it was Morgan. Now, although Mrs. Morgan, who's alive of course, denied it being her husband, the clothing was not that of her husband, the body was moved to Batavia and interred as Morgan, in brackets, the ghost of Morgan was said to walk. However, it appears that another gentleman had gone missing, known to have been drowned after falling off a rowboat about the same time in the same vicinity. And on record is the fact that another lady, a Mrs. Munro of Clark, Upper Canada, who, after this body was disinterred for a second time, and after satisfactory proof and identification, being hair, clothing, teeth, and height, had been established, possibly claimed that the body was her husband Timothy, and she received the remains for family burial. On the 29th of October 1827, a coroner's jury duly brought in a verdict that, quote, the body is that of Timothy Munro, who was drowned in the Niagara River on the 26th of September 1827. This inquest came too late and did not receive the necessary publication. Morgan anti-Masonic sentiment has spread across North America, and many involved and biased people refused to accept this inquest as it would detract from the aims to destroy Freemasonry. It was reported, quote, that he was a good enough Morgan until after the election, unquote. Indeed, if any other person went missing, namely two anti-Masonic individuals like Elisha Adams and Isaac Adams, it was immediately claimed in the press that the Masons had murdered them as two. But of course, they were well alive, subsequently found living elsewhere. To this very day, there has never ever been brought any proof that Morgan was murdered despite multiple inquiries. Many people started to complain that the original judicial sentences had been too light because of undue Masonic influence within the courts. But the law at the time was that abduction of a white man could only be punished by imprisonment. Also, there was no body to cite proof of homicide. The aforementioned Thurlow Weed, seeking publicity out of his desire to wield political influence, proceeded to drive this anti-Masonic feeling to a fury and succeeded. When the anti-Masonic movement erupted in Leroy, New York, Thurlow Weed became further politically active in its cause. He also shrewdly sought to align anti-Masonic politics with the National Republican Organization supporting John Quincy Adams in 1828, and in this he succeeded. By 1829, there were over 100 anti-Masonic newspapers being published, mostly in the North. Almost as quickly, anti-Masonic parties formed in several states, and in 1831, the Anti-Masonic Party became the first third-party movement in the United States, running former Freemason William Witt for president, carrying the state of Vermont, and actually receiving 8% of the national vote. The party elected governors in Pennsylvania and Vermont, as well as a number of United States congressmen. And I just want to propose something else now. Start screen, share. I want you to look at this caricature here. This is representative of cartoons in the anti-Masonic press of the day. This caricature represents how the public felt that Masons had a hand in all government affairs. In fact, I think even today that would be considered an illegal cartoon of any kind. Okay. Their platform was simple. Masonry was anti-democratic and anti-American, and it opposed Christianity. Therefore, Masonry must be driven out of the country. One of the party's most high-profile supporters was President John Quincy Adams, who had been defeated for a re-election in 1828 by Andrew Jackson, who was a past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Tennessee. Another supporter was the future Secretary of State, William Seward. So, to reiterate, it is a fact that the anti-Masonic party holds the distinction of not only being the first major third party, but also being the first political party in the United States to hold a national convention. The Declaration of Independence from the Masonic Code was adopted, involving 18 charges against Freemasonry. The declaration stated specifically that the candidates for governor and the lieutenant governor be anti-Masonic. One of the main signatories to this charter, apart from Weed, was the Reverend David Bernard. This gentleman was a pastor of the Baptist Church in Warsaw, New York, who, on the announcement of Morgan's disappearance, renounced Freemasonry and spent the next 20 years vilifying and organizing all the anti-Masonic conventions. It was he who insisted that Masonic clergymen resign or be dismissed from their posts. Anti-Masonry spread more or less extensively into all the states. It denounced first the system and then the men as unfit for any office and unworthy of any countenance. It not only denounced the men, but denounced those who would not denounce them. Anti-Masonic committees were established. Masonic meetings were disrupted. Weed's support of anti-Masonry made him an influential, staunch supporter of Abraham Lincoln. He became an advisor to the new president on political appointments, as well as serving as an unofficial envoy during the Civil War to Britain and France. Weed and others claimed that there had been a cover-up. At that time, Masons were considered by many to be above the law, a secret cabal. Jealousy coupled with greed by those not able to gain membership, together with those denied membership, were factors which fueled anti-Masonry. Society abounded with politicians seeking popularity, like Weed. There was the clergy, who saw souls to be saved, as witnessed by the pastor. And finally, the press. News created equals money, as we well know to our cost today. Nothing has changed. There were charges of illegal and immoral activities. Masons were accused of subverting political and religious institutions, quote, time-serving parasites and canting hypocrites, hitherto sunk in hopeless obscurity, crawling forth from their concealment, flocked to the standard of anarchy and joined in the general uproar, proclaiming death to Freemasonry, unquote. Women and the church, especially the Baptist and Lutheran churches, joined in against Freemasonry. But for the movement to progress, they had to become a political animal. And in this, they eventually succeeded. In 1840, an anti-Masonic president was elected, supported by Thurlow Weed, who had failed in the previous election. William Harrison was set to enact the Whig program, but he died 31 days later in office from pneumonia. In 1860, Weed failed to secure the presidential Republican nomination for his friend William Seward, a veteran and active anti-Masonic politician of the 1830s. And as a result, Weed then just lost his political influence. The anti-Masonic political party had now lost all its potential, but I must note here that its decline really started in the presidential election of 1832, in which anti-Masonic candidates took a beating, despite drawing votes away from Henry Clay, the Whig candidate, and winning several seats in the United States Congress for New England states. Only Thurlow Weed's presence gave it a semblance of respectability. Andrew Jackson, a Freemason, became president. He won re-election with an overwhelming majority of 219 to 7. Of note, President Jackson was also taxed with being a Freemason. Not only did he not attempt to deny it, but he wrote at the time, quote, "Freemasonry is an institution whose object is the welfare of mankind, and I am convinced that it will flourish in the future," unquote. During the 1836 presidential elections, the anti-Masonic party chose William Harrison as its candidate. He came in second to Van Buren. After this defeat, the anti-Masonic party was absorbed by the Whig party, and in the 1840 election nominated Harrison, who was able to win the presidency. Former Masons who were prominent politicians made anti-Masonic statements to curry favor. These included President Quincy Adams, Thaddeus Stevens, and Daniel Webster, who may be better known to any American brethren. To quote the former, "Masonry should be abolished. It is wrong, a seed of evil which can never produce any good. This order is a foul blot on the community," unquote. The anti-Masonic press printed the following: "Freemasonry is the step that leads down to hell, the path of perdition, conclaves of corruption, protection of fraud and villainy, and the academy of tipplers." Well, there's a bit of truth in that. Despite all the above, it is of interest that Andrew Jackson, a former Grand Master of Tennessee, who was twice elected president in 1828 and 1832, before the anti-Masonic party, eventually merged into the new Whig party, which became the forerunner of today's Republican Party, and as I mentioned earlier, that led to President Trump of today and his Jerusalem Declaration, which was good for my country. However, 4 anti-Masonic state senators and 17 assemblymen were elected during the 1830 to 1845 period. Indeed, much damage was done. The number of Masons dropped from 100,000 to 40,000 in 10 years. New York alone went from 20,000 to just 3,000 brethren, down from 480 lodges to 82. Some Grand Lodges ceased to meet. Indeed, the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania had to surrender its charter in 1834, having conveyed its property to trustees. It was reincorporated in 1859. But the American Masonic Record and Albany Saturday Magazine of 1829, in February 1829, did report, "We have the pleasure to inform our friends, however, that we are yet among the living with our usual quantity of masonry on our shoulders, and that we have no well-grounded expectation of departing to another region immediately," unquote. And in May the same year, it reported that 80 anti-Masons in Rochester met and publicly renounced all connection with anti-Masonic faction, having seen and experienced family friction, violence, misuse of the church, and, quote, "they have not seen any benefits arising from anti-Masonry to counterbalance even the least of these evils." Of interest, on the 3rd anniversary of Morgan's abduction in Watertown in Albany, 50 anti-Masons sat down to a dinner prepared for 500. Even so, the Masons were identifiable, the well-dressed leaders of community and business. Masonic clergy were dismissed from their churches, lodges were burnt, public Masonic ceremonies ceased. The craft was discredited as an intellectual society. No longer did someone try to join in order to be socially conscious. However, the anti-Masonic party led to other challenges. Prohibition, William's suffrage, etc., in that they felt the ends justified the means. And it was only after the Civil War that Freemasonry began to stage a significant comeback, as reported in the Masonic World in September 1889. Quote, "The cry that was raised against Freemasonry in the anti-Masonic period, with all the opprobrious epithets which malice, spleen, or jealousy can invent, regarding Morgan as a scapegoat served its purpose and had its time in the arena of politics. Change of public opinion brought returning prosperity to the craft, and, quote, the altars of the lodges glowed anew with the fires of reawakened zeal, unquote, attended by honest, upright citizens. The monument mentioned earlier that I showed you, that stands in Batavia, is an ever-present reminder that while it was in Western New York that Masonry was disgraced, vilified, and almost died, it was in the same district where the resurrection took place. So in the end, truth and honesty will always shine forth. A lot of my stuff actually comes from the American Masonic Record and Albany Saturday Magazine of 1829, which a very kind brother in America actually sent to me. We've had it in our lodge for several years now, and it's amazing to follow the correspondence that right through the year 1829. So I say, so mote it be, and I thank you all for your kind attention.
Worshipful Brother David, thank you so much for taking us back in time to that very troubling period for the craft in general, but particularly in America. And I think, as you said at the top of the shop, that it is very much something that still rumbles on in some quarters in America. And the Morgan affair has not ever really been forgotten about. And I think books like this, Bern, by Stephen Defoe, are bestsellers in America when the Bren want to go back and read. And if you do get a chance to have a look at that, Bren, I think it expands lovely on what Brother David said to us this evening. So hopefully, David, there may be some questions for you in the chat. Let's have a wee look. Or you may have covered the subject to such an extent that you've blown their mind that people could be anti-Masonic, because who would have thought? It doesn't happen in Scotland, I don't think. Not. So no, it's no video, no video. Paul, we hope your coughing stops and you're feeling better, sir. So, Brother Ron Mann asks, why was the American public so eager to discredit Freemasonry, do you think?
I think for a similar reason that we face it again today. People talk as, we're satanic, we're Luciferian, we're, they still think we're anti-church. Someone's just posted similarly. They treat it as, they think it's a religion and therefore we're anti the real religions. The reasons don't go away. And all we have to do, we have to become more open, presentable, show what we do, get your face in the press, show your charity, invite people to just an open meeting, general. I've had the privilege, and some of the brethren here, I think also may have been watching the Sapere Audi presentations of Masonic lectures, which is over 200 now. And these were open to anybody interested in Freemasonry, women Freemasons, all jurisdictions, all around the world, and spreading the good word. So much so that Quattro Coronati has given the approbation, for what it's been doing. By opening up, we know who we are. Our telephone numbers are in the press, the buildings stand out. I think people don't like our success. Today, you know what's happening today. I went to England. I had to be very careful how I spoke. Woke, non-you, all this sort of thing. It's not how I grew up. It's changing. But we can still put on the face of respectability and show that we're open and answer questions openly. today you can go into Grand Lodge in London, you can, and probably in Scotland or wherever, and you can walk around, you can see, and this, that, and the other. We don't hide things. There's no need to hide anything. And I think anybody who's prepared to answer what Freemasonry is has to know his facts, has to be able to explain it simply to people. And I've seen, you and I and all your brethren have seen so much rubbish printed, anti-Masonic. A lot of, you can't deal with these people. We've got the same problem today, say, COVID, okay? Look at the people who don't want to be vaccinated. You either got it or you haven't. You've got resistance or people don't like to face truth.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on there, David. And I think in terms of the COVID, I think we saw Brother Bob Cooper shared with us a lecture previously about anti-Masonry, and one of the posters he showed was that the Masons were behind the pandemic, which was a poster on a lamppost in America.
We've said Israel was behind the pandemic. People will do anything to create news or to make a headline for themselves.
Yeah,
but we tend not to create headlines. Maybe we should be creating what I call positive headlines.
Yeah, well, I think most people on here will agree with you. Ian Waugh comments, David, I think the Baptist and Methodist churches still tend to be anti-Masonic. I'm not surprised the body was never found to ensure no trace of such a vile wretch. Well, there you go. Tom Edgar, David, very interesting. Thank you. Alan Turton, David, thank you. A wonderfully constructed and presented talk. Our accusers rather diminish themselves in their morals and ethics. Sandy Thompson asks, how well is Masonry received in Israel?
Okay, Masonry is probably not as well known as it should be in Israel. Look, we have 1,200 Masons approximately in Israel. Okay, population of in Israel per se, 8.5, 9 million people. We speak 9 languages, but let's just say the meetings are conducted in any one of 9 languages. Starting, you've got Hebrew, you've got English, you've got Arabic, the 3 mains, Russian, French, Romanian, I'm trying to think where we're going, Spanish, Portuguese. Because people have come from all over the world to live here. The Grand Lodge of Israel is just moving its premises from Tel Aviv to near Tel Aviv. We had we're actually in proper premises of our own where we can't be thrown out of. We had a problem. We have approximately 55, 60 lodges. Chapter is much less. It's much less strong, but we managed. Scottish Rite is picking up, and everybody supports everybody else. In other words, English speakers will support the English speakers. We'll go over. Visiting is encouraged, etc. It's just a matter of travel, and if the wife lets you go out too many nights a week. I'm just pleased to have been a Freemason here, to met some great people, also on Zoom as well, and know that I'm welcome wherever I go in the world when I've got the time to do it. Yeah. Israel, of course, is regarded as the spiritual center of Freemasonry because we talk about Solomon's Temple. And there are so many workings here. I mean, my ran in a lodge, by the way. We work what's called the Netherlandic Rite. Just give us just something simple, which is it's a French derivation, but it's conducted in English. It came to Israel via the old Rhodesia through South Africa and brought by brethren to Israel. We only have 1 tracing board, which goes on the floor. Okay, and this is how it's used. We don't have 3. And people come to see something different and to experience something different. But people we've met, the friends we've made, just to get together, have a cup of coffee, the friendship's there. And thank God, say Freemasonry is alive. We're having a new Grand Masters being elected. Where we're now in a week's time, officially elected. He's been nominated, but he's the only person who's nominated, who's taking over. So he's essentially his Kavar is already in, and the rest of the Grand Lodge team will be elected, the superintendents, etc. And we actually, Israel is looking forward. We hope in 23 now, I think, maybe 22 or 23. We had to cancel. They were going to have the Grand Lodge Brethren conference in Israel. It had to be postponed. So I think it's just been moved on. They started to reorganize things again. And we hope to see many brethren here. And anybody who comes is always made welcome. All you have to do is pick up the phone, and lodges are available. But mainly, we work mainly, shall we say, between September and May. Once it's summer recess, it's too hot, it's we close down.
That's just like Scotland, David.
There are some lodges that work year round. There are a few Hebrews people who work their lodge, but basically those 6 months, or September to May, it's 8, 9 months of the year is when we're busy through the what's called the cooler part of the year, and everybody's welcome, no problem.
Thank you. Michael Monroe, I think your hand was up. Oh, he's put a comment in now. So Michael, is it the same comment? One result of the Morgan affair. Do you want to place it yourself, Michael?
Well, just that the lodges in the USA tend to open in the 3rd degree rather than the 1st, and this was a result of the Morgan affair. They decided they would change the way lodges open rather than in the 1st degree, and call into the, open up into the 3rd or 2nd or 3rd afterwards. No, they open in the 3rd and then they call down into the 1st, or open the 1st and then 2nd. This was precisely to prevent people like Morgan from gaining admission to their lodges and finding out more secrets. It's understood that he understood a few secrets, apparently, and managed to glean more by illegally attending lodges, illegally by Masonic standards, that is. There's only one state that has reverted back to opening in the 1st degree. I'm not sure which one it is now, either Pennsylvania or New York State. But yeah, until very recently, all American lodges opened in the 3rd.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, Brother Michael, just to add, our lodge actually opens in the 3rd. We do our business, and then we go down to whatever we're doing 2nd or 1st accordingly.
Okay. Well, thank you for your talk. It was very interesting. But I've heard talks on the Morgan affair before, but you've come up with some details I've never heard before, which is very interesting.
Thank you.
So thank you. Yes, thank you for the talk. But as a point, is your do you do American working in your lodges?
I don't think so. I will see visiting Americans doing different signs, which we are comfortable with and we acknowledge, but we don't do American work. Most of the workings here, the Israel Grand Lodge was initially inaugurated under the Grand Lodge of Scotland. They were our Grand Lodge of Scotland is our patron. So we have, so whilst you have different workings in Scottish lodges, we basically follow we're more Scottish, you might say, than English, although you will see the occasional English working or English influence in some of the lodges, because some brethren can't forget what they learned 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So but no American influence here.
Other than opening in the 3rd?
No, most people open in the 1st and work their way up. But I'm just saying our lodge per se, which is this the Netherlandic rite, I think Schroeder also may do open in the 3rd and then come down accordingly.
Schroeder over here work in the 1st. Well, in England work in the 1st.
Okay. I said, but we're very similar in some ways with Schroeder. Ours, it is a modified French rite. And but our first reworking is actually surprises people who've never seen it before, and they find it much more informative than the regular first degree initiation working that they're familiar with.
I think that is, in itself, Bern, is an opportunity to take up David on his offer to get over and see this, because that's what visiting's all about. What makes our craft so beautiful and so special. And we can see there in the chat that our junior deacon Billy, he went to all the holy places in Israel in 2006 with his church, and he says, "What a beautiful country that you've got." And I think on that, worshipful brother David Barrett, can I thank you once again for coming along here this evening and giving us that very powerful lecture on a dark time in Masonic history in the United States. So David, on behalf of us all here at the Lockdown Lecture Series, thank you so much, sir.
It was my pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you.
I wish all your brethren good health, stay well, enjoy your pints or your whiskey, and I hope you have many more meetings.
And David, if you stay around for just a minute or two, you'll get to hear some of their voices after I give next week's intimation. And Brian, next week we're going to be joined by Brother Jacques Hubert, and he's going to talk to us about something called the metaverse and the meta-Masonic. I am assured by Brother John Belton that's a really interesting lecture. And I think it's got something to do with Facebook, because everything's went meta on Facebook.
I've seen his lecture. It's good.
Is it good, David? Great. Jax is a very interesting character. I think he's a past master in 5 different constitutions, or maybe at least 3, certainly, but I think possibly 5. And many of you may have seen him at the Grand Lodge of Scotland History and Heritage presentations about talking about Sri Lanka, where I currently believe he resides. So he will be with us next Tuesday at 7 o'clock.
Can I just tell you, when I do a paper now, I pass it on to Jack. So give me a read and tell me what you think.
Ah, brilliant.
He gives me the okay.
So this paper was approved by Jacques in the past, said David.
This one, no, but there's another one I did where I deliberately gave it to him to have a read through. And I have another paper. If you're interested at a later date, I've got a paper which I call Masonic Buzz.
I will certainly be in touch with you about that, because we will be keeping these going on, maybe not on a weekly basis, Bern, as we've stated, but at least on a monthly basis going forward. And with that, Bern, please feel free to unmute and give your own personal congratulations and thank yous to worshipful brother David Barrett, all the way from the Grand Lodge of Israel.
David, thank you very much. It was excellent. I really enjoyed that.
David, superb. I love the way you put it together. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. It was really good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and congratulations on a superb lecture.
Thank you.
Very thought-provoking.
Thank you, David. Very well presented. Thank you.
Very good presentation. Very good presentation, Brother David, and interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother David. Really enjoyed that one. Thank you.
And I'll give you 5, brethren.
Thank you very much, Brother David, and shalom to you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, David. Very good talk.
Shalom Aleichem from me.
Thank you.
And
thank you, David. Wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronnie.
And 3, brethren. We always do this countdown, David. It gets just I prove to them that I'm slightly educated and I can count backwards. And 2,
we really
brethren.
know you're following a chart there, Gordon.
It's there.
Thank you, Gordon, and good night, brethren.
Thanks, Howard.
And
And 1, brethren.
Good night, brethren. See you next week.
Once again, worshipful brother David Barrett, thank you so much for joining us at the Lodge Hope of Karachi Lockdown Lecture Series. Thank you, sir.